Welcome to Building Brand Gravity. I'm Anne Green. I am a principal and managing director here at G&S Business Communications, and I'm so excited today to welcome a guest who I first heard speak at an event earlier this year, and I was so interested in everything he had to say. I reached out to ask him for a coffee, and then I said, "Will you be on my podcast?" And the rest is history. And here we are. Howard Pyle, welcome to Building Brand Gravity.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Howard, tell us a little bit about. I'm going to let you tell your own bio, your career trajectory, because you've had a really interesting arc to bring you to the organization you founded today, which is experiencefutures.org, which has many arms to it. But tell me a little bit about so our listeners understand your career path.
Sure. Yeah, it's a winding road for sure. I think that I'm one of those people that my career journey really only makes sense in retrospect. I've had many points in my career where people have said to me, even close friends, like, "What are you doing now? Like, what is that?" But the long and the short of it is that I've been in at the intersection of digital product design, development, platform, brands, communications for over 20 years. And I started my career as actually an engineer, and I was a developer in a design collective in Washington, D.C., a long time ago, very early digital shop. And then I went on to be a dev lead in a communications agency, early digital shop, and a CTO a CTO at a .com, and then went on from there and ran startups. I ran a mobile startup for a little while, and we got bought out by an agency network. And through some twists and turns, I wound up at Ogilvy, and I was a senior partner at Ogilvy, leading digital platforms for the IBM business globally during Smarter Planet. And so it was this kind of interesting transition point in my career from tech, digital focused companies to suddenly being in an advertising agency, the biggest company I had ever worked at by several tens of thousands of people. And then working on IBM, which was, of course, a monster. And I had no experience working with giant organizations. I was at Ogilvy for a couple of years, 3 years. And then my client at IBM got promoted, and he asked me to step in and take his job. So I went to IBM and I ran a network of design studios. I ultimately transitioned and ran developer marketing for all the business units. And then I went to MetLife, where I ran global brand design, UX, front-end platforms, ultimately running integrated marketing and communications for not like comms, but for brand and creative campaigns and sponsorships. And we rebranded the company for the first time in 30 years and rolled out a global design system and rolled out new front end platforms. And so I had this kind of 10 years in startups and 10 years at big, ginormous companies. And the thing that I found was that we were, number one, we've gotten to this place where our digital lives have become too complicated. And by the way, it's super complicated within every company. Managing digital ecosystems, managing web and mobile properties, managing design and dev, and seeing that there is a disconnect between the mission and purpose of a company and their business impact in digital spaces. Seeing that there's a big disconnect there, and also seeing the second thing is that automation and AI were going to hit the front end experience layer, that we're going to hit design, UX, communications. And so I left MetLife and I started this organization, Experience Futures. And we're very focused on this next era of how AI is going to impact our digital lives, how it's going to impact digital accessibility. We focus on partnering with organizations, helping them to use AI to drive inclusivity, drive digital access, and create positive outcomes using these new technologies. So that's the kind of journey and the high level pitch of where I am now.
Well, I love this. And part of what interested me in talking to you and what excited me when I first heard you speak, which was really about that digital divide. And I want to dig deep with you in that in a moment. But before that, I just want to reflect on how interesting it is to hear that career arc. And I appreciate you taking us through it because the intersectionality to start off in what would be very much understood as a development engineering type of career, but then to understand like where you ended up, advertising, UX, consumer experience, the brand, a rebranding of an entity like MetLife, it just shows you how the arc of a career through this marketing communications brand landscape that also deeply involves technology and the experience of the customers. It's so intertwined, right? I mean, what an
Yeah.
incredible intersection of different perspectives.
Yeah, well, we can say that now. 10 years ago, it would have been like, wait, you're doing
Yeah,
what now?
exactly.
What are you doing? You're working for an advertising agency now? And but I think that there is a through line there. And I think it's really about it's funny because there was this brief moment where I really believed the term customer experience was going to be a great kind of rally cry for how all these things come together in a company. And actually my
Yeah.
title at MetLife was um, SVP of Global Customer Experience and Design. And the customer experience part of it was constantly confusing to people, like internally and externally. Some people thought it meant customer service. Some people thought it meant, journey analytics or NPS reporting. It's funny because there isn't really a great term in companies
Mm-hmm.
for the way that we engage people in digital spaces, because it's not just about product. It's not just about technology. It's not just communications. It's not just marketing. It's not just development. It's not just data, but somehow it's the collection of all of those things. And I think that's part of, to me, the through line is the relationship that companies have with individuals as a result of our digital era. You could actually call that brand. You could say brand is the relationship
Mm-hmm.
that you have with a company. Or you could say it's the customer experience, which is every touch point, every interaction. The sum of all those is your relationship with a company. And more that is technology plus brand plus communications plus design. So I think there's a kind of an unnamed territory. There's a territory there that we don't actually have a great word for, I think.
You talked about at the end of all this, and now you're at a new beginning, and it's
Yeah.
been a few years now, to launch something like Experience Futures. When you visit that website, and I encourage people to check it out, experiencefutures.org, you forefront the statement, the assertion of a digital divide. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important that we ask you to address this right now to so that you can share with our listeners what does that mean to you and what is the urgency of that today?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for that, because I think that it's to me it's a critical point of discussion. And I think, as a lot of people did coming out of COVID, there's a lot of soul searching. There's a lot of soul searching. Like, what does my work mean? What role do I play? And on a personal level, like, what am I contributing to the world? Am I pursuing the things that I'm passionate about? And for me, it really starts with the fact that I I'm not somebody that should ever have a knowledge worker or white collar job. I just don't have the intellectual capability for it. Not that I'm not smart, but I don't have a set of tools that I think a lot of people are expected to have in those corporate jobs. And
Mm,
very specifically, I'm crushingly dyslexic, but I also
hmm.
have other kind of neurodiversity challenges. I have, some memory challenges. I have challenges with, developing and structured reading very, very long documents.
Hmm.
But where it hits me is my ability to write and craft communications in a way that's deeply kind of inherent in being a knowledge worker. So to
Yeah.
me, as that, it's very strange to me that I wound up in the positions that I wound up in. And there's a very simple answer as to why I was able to do that, which is I found a set of technology tools very early on that helped me normalize my abilities to be at parity with other people. Right.
Hmm.
And that is, I'm very privileged to have that. I'm very privileged to have that. And I think that I have quite a number of examples of like over the years where I have created, you know, campaigns or programs or communications, but even individual emails to clients where I've labored over the words, where I've gone back and reread something 40 times and I've missed the fact that there's no verb, or I've missed the fact that I've said and twice, or, you know, my run-on sentences have run-on sentences inside of them. And I think that you know, it's funny because I think that there's you know, the very simple example, and there's other examples, but the simple example is I've been able to, over the years, use a combination of, you know, grammar tools and spell checker tools and, you know, like tools that allow me to dictate. You know, I've experimented with every flavor of voice dictation going back to, you know, the 90s. And I found a set of tools that worked for me. And I was privileged and fortunate to be able to have done that so that my aptitude, my intellect could be applied to some of these problems. But for many, many other people, the ability to navigate challenges like that is not something that allows them to kind of proceed into those jobs. It can be very challenging. And that got me really became. I think over the years I'd been aware of it quite a bit, but it brought me to a set of research and some questions that I began poking into, which is what do we call this thing that divides people at the experience layer? Why is it? So I have a computer, you have a computer, you have more access than I do to the tools and services. What is that called? What do we even describe that as? And I think there's different terminology you could apply to it, but what we found through the research that we did is that it's actually another layer of the digital divide. And the first layer of the digital divide is this idea of having access to a computer, having access to internet access. And the second layer,
which, by the way, is where I think that first layer is where a lot of people stop. Am I right about that?
That's right. And that's a very, and it's natural because that's the only layer we've been really made aware of. The academics that we follow and that we've worked with talk about a second layer of the digital divide, which is this idea of design access, content access, and cognitive access. So the idea of if you don't understand how an interface is created, if you don't understand the language, if you can't navigate and you know, use those tools as they were designed, then you lose access to everything that comes with digital: access to jobs, access to education, access to healthcare, access to financial management. And so the second layer of the digital divide is actually an enormous challenge that there's not a lot of research on. But it's really tied to this idea of digital capital. And do I have digital capital, and can I navigate in my job? Can I navigate in my finances? Can I navigate in social communities online? Can I use resources that are available for me? And more and more and more, what we've found is that there is a gap in the services, the digital services that companies and governments and NGOs provide, where because their sites aren't intuitive, they aren't easy to navigate, and yes, even not accessible from an ADA perspective for people with disabilities, but even beyond that, that people lose access to the services that they're providing. So the second layer of the digital divide is really, you know, do your websites make sense to people? Do your apps make sense to people? Do your communications make sense to people? Do they understand your language? And if not, you are restricting access to essential services that they need, whether you're in the public or the private sector. So the second layer of the digital divide is really the experience layer.
Something you and I haven't even talked about, but it's coming to mind very strongly for me right now, is all of the websites and really functions that are speed based, as in, I want to try to get a restaurant reservation. I want to try to get tickets. I want to try to get, you had mentioned the vaccine websites in New York City.
Yeah.
It's a race, right? And it's like there's a clock ticking down, or this ticket to a show, or this ticket to a concert, or this table. It's based on how quickly, both physically, but also cognitively, And where the frig is my credit card, or am I using like Apple Pay? Like, how fast can I process in order to race somebody else for an outcome? Now, the vaccine one, when you shared that anecdote, and I'd love you to reshare
Sure.
that quote
Yeah,
that you
sure.
shared with me when you were at the Page Spring Seminar earlier this year, because that literally hit me like a lightning bolt.
Yeah, yeah, that was a big moment. In New York City during COVID, the both access to testing and access to the vaccines
Yep.
was released on these state and city run websites. And listen, I don't know the teams that made them, and I'm sure they were under an incredible amount of pressure, but they were terrible. They were terrible, terrible sites. They were difficult to navigate. They probably got thrown up in a matter of days, which makes sense because their priority was speed to market, getting it out to people. But what happened was people literally couldn't navigate those websites. And it was particularly pronounced on the vaccine finder websites. There was this kind of touching moment that happened where when the vaccine sites came out, people on Facebook and on Reddit were banding together and saying, if you know someone that's older that can't navigate
Yeah.
these websites, which by the way, it was supposed to be that the most at-risk communities got the vaccines first, people
I
who are
remember.
older, at
Yeah.
risk, right,
Yep.
living in nursing homes, but they literally couldn't navigate the website. So
No.
it's kind of touching. People were like, well, if you know someone that needs help navigating this website, we'll help them, an older person. But it's a statement of
Insane.
failure. It's a statement of absolute failure of a public service and a system that's meant to be accessible by a certain audience. And it didn't work. So there was this quote writing about that situation. There was a quote in the New York Times that said, when you set up a system that's a race between 25-year-olds and 85-year-olds, that's not a race, that's elder abuse.
Yeah.
And
I think
that's,
that's powerful.
yeah, it's a really powerful statement. And I think that and by the way, this is what's really interesting is in my roles at MetLife, at IBM, in the startups that I work with, the idea of accessibility often means, are you going to get in trouble for ADA compliance or not? And ADA
Yes,
compliance,
that is such a good point.
yeah, and this is a very, very this is probably the most important thing to kind of dismantle. ADA compliance is the only lever that we have around accessibility and inclusion in digital spaces, right? And the lever is, does it work for people that have a certain type of disability and that use a certain type of assistive technologies? And the only punishment is public lawsuits. So there's people who go around and just sue companies for ADA, ADA violations. So it's seen organizationally in a lot of places as a checkbox. I can't tell you how many times I've built a product or a design system, and the only funding for accessibility is at the very end if there's a problem, right? It's never meant to be
Yeah.
something that so these vaccine sites, they may have been technically accessible, but they were unusable by at-risk communities. So when you think about, well, what's the expanded definition of inclusion there? Well, it's not just ADA accessibility, it's people that are older, people from lower socioeconomic households that maybe are mobile only users and those sites only worked on desktop computers. It's people with neurodiversity. And yes, of course, people with, that are living with disabilities. So the idea is that it's a much, much, much larger population that we have to design for to be inclusive. And I think, in our position, is that inclusivity is bigger than accessibility. And we find
Yeah.
accessibility in the design community to be a labyrinth of confusion, and this is a big challenge.
I think this is so profound because, first of all, and I want to get back to this opening the aperture more on what is inclusion. But the first thing I would observe is that I've spent a lot of my career really interested in ethics relative to the communications industry. And as you know, there are things like ethics training that are very much viewed as a checkbox.
Mm-hmm.
When you treat it that way, it becomes something that's like, I got to deal with that stupid thing, people treat it that way with anti-harassment training too, of course. But to me, moving through the world, through your life, through your business life with an ethical lens, a set of tools that helps you make some assessments, opens your eyes to a whole new world. And having discussions with people that are much more dynamic about what is ethics, where is it existing, how do we use it, which will be, by the way, very relevant when we start to talk about AI more.
Mm-hmm.
I find people to be very limited. And so to go to the question of, say, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, one of the things we've been interrogating at G&S with our own DE&I task force is, how do we understand where we're limiting or putting ourselves in a box about what inclusion means?
Yeah.
How do we understand ability, disability, and accessibility differently? And I think listening to people like you, Howard, it reminds us we are all different. Like, you storytelling about your own set of skills and your own cognition. I used to work with Richard Branson. I understand how talented, my father was severely dyslexic, how talented people can be, but what tools you need. But I think that cracks open a whole new world for us of understanding what inclusion can mean. Because if we are lucky enough to age as individuals, our ability will change.
Yeah,
Our
that's
ability
right.
to navigate the world is not going to be the same. And
That's right.
you coined a term, and maybe this is a good way to connect the dots here. With Experience Futures, you talk about human experience.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Mm-hmm.
your way of putting your arms around these issues, and also talking about that
Yeah.
earlier challenge you have of what's the language for this?
So I think that the simple statement is that if you look at human experience and you look at the idea that we need to design around the individual, whether they're a customer or they're an employee, you need to understand their needs. The past 15 years have been really focused on the idea of creating these collaborative workshops, design thinking sessions,
Yep.
these very kind of like workshops with representative users. And then from that, building one experience that's supposed to work for most people. And I think what we've learned is that there is no such thing as most people in digital spaces.
Yeah.
My abilities based on my dyslexia, my mom's abilities based on, her age, my partner's ability based on her visual impairment, so there's everyone has a set of unique needs at this point. That's just truth. There's data to back that up. So if you think about using workshops and design thinking sessions and collaborative spaces, although it can be very powerful from a relationship development and a alignment of thinking perspective, the actual use cases that you can create, the products, the experiences, the actual output that you create from that is actually really limited. And oh, by the way, you got to get everybody in person. And oh, by the way, you may not be able to get representative users. And oh, by the way, 8 different agencies are all selling you design thinking exercises. And what we have to evolve to is a place where understanding what the user needs, understanding what design and content works for them, can then be delivered to that individual based on who they are, what they need, what we know about them. And the only way to solve that is to automate the experience. So we actually feel, and this is kind of our big, our big revolutionary statement. We actually believe that we need to design intentionally positive use cases for AI and automation in general in the world. For us, the focus is designing how AI can solve inclusion in digital spaces, not make accessibility better, not make things more inclusive, but literally solve the inclusion problem. Like that should be our ambition. And so as an organization, our goal is we're kind of the nonprofit side of what we do. We're kind of like a B2B nonprofit. We help organizations, and we have a goal of working with organizations that serve healthcare, finance, education, government, legal, for older users, for users living with disabilities, neurodiversity, socioeconomic challenges. If you think about the top players in each of those spaces, and if we can use AI to help transform the inclusion in digital spaces that they provide, we can impact digital access for 1 billion people by 2030. So that's our big audacious goal, is that we believe that through
Yeah.
partnerships, through the use of AI, through the use of automation, we can transform the digital lives and the digital capital for 1 billion people by 2030. And that's what we're
Yeah.
deeply focused on. So
Hmm.
where does AI come into it? Well, AI comes into it
Hmm.
because it's too much to design for, 5 different use cases
Yeah.
for individual needs for one digital product, say a website or a mobile app. Most teams, most companies just can't afford to do it. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, they don't have the
Yep.
engineering capacity, they don't have the designers, they just don't have the luxury. Every design organization and experience organization I've ever run has had waves of reduction. It's just been wave after wave after wave of reduction my entire career.
Hmm.
And the mantra in corporate America has become do more with less.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
if that's true, yet we need to have individualized experiences for our own unique abilities, that's a paradox. Less resources, less expertise, less funding, shorter timelines,
Yep.
more use cases, more permutations, more variation. We have to automate. So how do we use AI to solve the problem of delivering for individual need? And that's our grand mission. And
That's so
we
powerful.
yeah, and we have strategies both on the nonprofit side, and we have a software platform that we're creating to help with that. But in the end, we need to be looking at the technologies that we're creating, um, not just as trend lines or opportunities or things that we need to get on top of in order to stay current. Um, we also need to look at them as kind of vehicles of our personal ethics and beliefs. And I actually believe that I take this kind of radical stance that I actually don't think there's such a thing as ethical AI. I think that organizations and people
Really.
need to be ethical. And I think that that's the really grand challenge, is how do you design your technology and your use of technology to match your ethics, and how do you become intentional about what you're using those technologies for?
I couldn't love those questions more. When you and I corresponded about that, I remember watching the advent of social media, Web 1, Web 2. You and I have talked about some of this. My feeling about this is that there are things that are more and less comfortable for humans. Like an Excel spreadsheet does not cause existential angst, but social media has, because it's a complex set of personal and business. But the fact is that all of this is human generated. Until we have truly self-generative AI that becomes truly intelligent in whatever way we want to define that, and whatever that is in the future, um, we humans are involved. And so AI can be reach toward utopian, or it can be the garbage fire that other things are too. And I do think that that goes back to that individual ethical lens. And how is it that it's not something that's necessarily happening to us. We have to make active choices around it. I remember when one of the founders of virtual reality, I think it was Jaron Lanier, wrote his famous book, You Are Not a Gadget.
Yeah.
Like, he was trying to raise some red flags about these things, which is that there are active choices being made here about our interactions with mobile devices, with algorithms, with social media, with websites, et cetera. And I feel like you're raising a similar thing, that there are active choices that we have to make about how we're going to apply AI to this challenge of mass personalization.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, it's interesting that you mentioned Jaron Lanier. There's an article that he wrote in the New Yorker a few months back called "There Is No AI,"
Yeah.
which I think is really powerful.
Mm.
And part of the premise is that what we're experiencing right now isn't actually AI. And in the community that I'm a
Yeah.
part of, the technologists and the engineers that I work with, there is a dialogue that, yes, we're calling it AI, it's a label, but it's not actually
Yeah.
intelligent. It's not intelligence. What we're interacting with is incredibly
Yep.
large volumes of data with very sophisticated statistical algorithms finding patterns. So when you type in
Yep.
something to Chat GPT, it's not actually thinking and responding to you. It is using predictive analytics and statistics to be able to predict what the right response is based on the large amount of data that it's
Yep.
been trained on. So one of the biggest problems is I actually wrote a brief for a mentor who's on the number of corporate boards about how to think about this moment in AI. And the key point was the most important thing for a board member, for a C-suite executive, for leaders of all stripes in this moment on AI is understanding and being clear on the use cases that you're trying to solve is still the most
Mm-hmm.
important thing. And that's something that doesn't require technical expertise. It's what are we trying to solve? What is the business problem we're trying to solve? What is the use case we're envisioning? And then, in addition to that, you have a set of responsibilities. And I'm going to avoid using the word ethics here because I think that that's where you would normally say it. But let me say all this without saying the word ethics.
Yep.
Once I have an idea of what I might apply AI to,
Mm-hmm.
I need to understand and sure there's a feasibility analysis of is it possible, is it feasible, does it work? But I have a responsibility to ask myself and my organization and my peers a number of questions. Is it going to harm anyone? And if so, how? Are there any unintended consequences that might arise from using this tool? Am I disempowering individuals from essential decision making in their lives? For example,
Mm-hmm.
am I taking their choice away around critical healthcare intervention or something financial that might impact their family? Am I protecting their privacy? Am I making judgments or generalizations about who they are in a way that may impact them in a negative way? There's more. And I think that, but the idea is that there's a lot to do with AI without being technical or even before you get into the
Yeah.
technology or what is it going to do. But I think we see this at the beginning of every hype cycle, right?
Yeah.
People want technology to be installed and they want it to be used. But the truth is that it will die away except in the places where it has business value or other types of impact. And so I
Yeah.
think the most important thing for anyone to do that's either a user of AI personally or in their organization or participating in this is to double down on what problem are we trying to solve? What impact does it have on the organization or our goals? What impact does
Mm-hmm.
it have on the people? And does it align with our social impact goals, our mission, our values, our ethics, our DEI strategies and policies, our beliefs about our customers, the impact
Mm-hmm.
we want to have on the world?
I think what you've said, Howard, is so clarifying. Those questions that you shared with that mentor about what are the first things we should be forefronting before we get caught up in the shiny object. But I mean, there's so much here, and I'm going to really encourage people to listen to this conversation because I think it's helping me clarify some pieces too. Um, Before we wrap up today, because I know I've kept you a long time, what are some of the things that you're excited about now? We talk about the gravity of brands with this podcast, and there's a gravity to certain things. It could be music, art. I know that have been a musician, very engaged in that world over the years. But what are the things that you're excited about right now that you'd like to share?
Well, I'm excited about this moment of transformation in our
Yeah,
in our culture and in humanity. We are at a point where, technology is the story of humanity. The defining nature
yeah,
of us versus every other animal on the planet is our use of technology. So therefore, it is fundamentally
yeah,
human. The thing that I'm excited about is that we are accelerating fast. And I think that it's easy to be concerned about it, but it's also important to look at the optimism in that, which is that we
yeah,
have
yeah,
tools that will empower individuals in ways that we can't even imagine right now. So the thing I'm excited about is there has been an explosion, even in the past 6 months. Forget whether AI is AI or not. Forget what it does
yeah,
or doesn't
yeah,
do well. The
yeah.
fact is that it has been an explosion of invention. people using
Mm-hmm.
tools that couldn't use tools before, suddenly launching companies based on
Yeah.
them. I mean, 3,000 new AI companies have launched in the past 6 months. I mean, it's unbelievable. Tough time to be in the AI company business, but the but I think that the what that means to me is that it's sparked people's imaginations of how to solve
Yeah.
problems and empower people or create new, whether it's commercial or not, create new ways of integrating tools with our lives. And that to me is exciting. Like, I'm excited about that macro arc. And I think I think it's a powerful moment. It's a powerful moment for
Yeah.
humanity. And it's exciting to be, a participant. It's scary, but it's exciting. And I'm intentionally, I'm what I would say is I'm aggressively optimistic, meaning I'm going to be optimistic, God damn it, and I'm going to make
I
it,
love it.
I'm going to make the things that I believe in happen, as opposed to just worry about the things that I don't want to have happen. So I'm excited about that.
I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about it because, again, we have to be part of creating what we want to see. And that sounds like very highfalutin. But I also talk about the folks in our own agency. We're engaging with clients and others in the world all the time. We have to look at this moment as a moment of experimentation, of play, but also of caution and thoughtfulness. And part of being counselors is to understand both sides of these coins that humans are coming up with. And I do love the discussion about it. It's not really AI, and I totally get and respect that. And I think it's important too. I always like to respect the nuance, but at the same time, I love that message of optimism, and I want to share that too. But Howard, it's been so awesome as always to talk to you. I'm excited to share the conversations we've been having with hopefully a broader audience. And thank you so much again for joining us today on Building Brand Gravity.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.